I'm the artist taxi driver, and this, my friends, is Akala. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. Right then, I got some questions, right? You said that the dominant philosophy of our times was getting poor people to fight amongst themselves.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not even just the dominant philosophy of this time, but maybe of all time. If you're in power and you have illegitimately co-opted the resources and labour of everyday people in a massive way, which is what this system does and power systems have done, if they realise their common interests and their common oppression, and in any way push a common agenda against that, they'll be able to bargain for a much better deal, much better term, a much better social contract, to put it that way. And so you have to keep the have-nots, be that on racial lines, be it on religious lines, be it on whatever other belief system, even intra-group, you know, even if you have one group that you consider a homogenous group, having divisions between that group, you have to keep them fighting amongst themselves. It's an integral and necessary part of the world system the way it is.
That's how they maintain their power. But while you're doing that, they get to clean up.
Absolutely.
So this government at the moment is pushing, it's quite obviously, it's pushing this agenda, and it's looking to fight the next election on immigration, social security, nationalism, and prejudice.
Well, we have to also recognise the historical moment. You're in a position where, whether Europe wants to admit it or not, European power in the world is declining, and that's impossible to stop. It's just part of the historical forces. It was unnatural, Europe's rise, much later than it wants to admit, after the 1850s really, to become dominant over massive historical civilizations like China and India, for example, and even the so-called Middle East to a certain degree, and Africa. Europe having that asymmetrical and disproportionate power was never going to last. It was never tenable. People were going to resist, and eventually, like all empires, people were going to be put back in their correct position. We are in a historical moment where that, because of China, because of the BRICS, because of various other things that are going on in the world, because of historical forces, the influence of Europe over the rest of the world is declining. What we've got to look about is, if a people are brought up with a diet telling them they've been superior since the dawn of evolution, when it becomes self-evident that that is not the case, what is going to be the reaction of that? It's not going to be a humble, yeah, actually we need to accept that our power should be proportional to the percentage of humanity that we represent. You're going to get resentment, you're going to get frustration, and that frustration can be manipulated, as it always has been, by people in power, to make them believe that somehow immigrants, so-called immigrants, don't belong here, or even that they are immigrants. When my grandmother, as with every other Caribbean, as with most other Asians that have ended up in this country, when they came to this country, they were not immigrants, they were citizens of the British Commonwealth, moving from one Commonwealth country to another. If you want to go out around the world and say you are the mother country, and be the mothers of 52 nations, don't then act like a victim when your children come home. Come to the place, they're just following the wealth. If you want to take the wealth from Jamaica, from Grenada, from St. Lucia, from India, if you want to have people from all those places, from Kenya, from Zimbabwe, volunteer in your army, fight for you in various world wars, etc., right? And then the wealth of all those places gets sucked into this place, makes this place so rich. Don't be surprised if the economic conditions in their countries are made so difficult they can't make a living there, that they follow the wealth. They're only following the wealth from their own countries. They would have stayed in. We would have stayed probably in our own countries if the wealth hadn't have come here, and if it wasn't so difficult and wasn't deliberately made so difficult to maintain a living in those places. So all of that historical background can easily be manipulated by people who've been taught somehow that Britain is a homogenous white country, which to anyone who's read even 5 pages of history, they know is absolute nonsense. The Roman legions that invaded this country 2,000 years ago were multicultural. The Phoenicians that were very probably, we know, in Cornwall mining for tin 2,500, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. The fact that Queen Elizabeth I issued a letter to the Lord Mayor of London and his aldermen in 1596 complaining about how many blackamoors were already in this country. So there were already significant numbers of black people in this country in 1596 for it to be an immigration problem. We can fast forward to 1731, where the Lord Mayor of London again issued a proclamation preventing black people from learning a trade or a skill. So this issue isn't new. But the problem is it's casted in a sort of post-World War II, all these brown people from countries we've got no idea why we have a connection to came here. And so it's about re-educating people and making them understand how using the issues of immigration, of social security, of all these other things, and getting us to buy into the belief that these foreigners are the problem is a way of distracting everyday working class people from the very real oppression and theft that is occurring every single day.
So, and we've also got these racist immigrant go-home vans trawling the streets of London.
You know, that's the first I've heard of this, but it doesn't surprise me. This is what I'm saying. But the as much as I don't excuse that kind of virulent, ugly behaviour, as much as I don't excuse these uneducated, predominantly working class groups that voice racism in a more visceral way, I don't lose sight of the bigger picture, that those people are too ignorant to see, or maybe they're willing tools, a bit of both. Some are too ignorant to see that they're being manipulated. Some are willing tools for rich people in power who say, oh, we would never say such a thing, or it's repugnant to speak of black people that way, while simultaneously having policies that, why can a citizen of the British Commonwealth not get into Britain easier than a German who were at war with this country 60 years ago? A citizen of the EU, the European Union, not the British Union, can get into England easier than a citizen of the British Commonwealth.
We have an all-white government, an all-male white government.
And all rich. How many people are on £10 an hour, do you think?
Why do you think that prejudice is such a gaping open wound in people?
Because humans are stupid, A, but B, because of history. If you look at historically, people believe themselves to be moral. And when you have a history, when you choose to become an empire is immoral. It is organised armed robbery as a national policy. So whatever empire, that's not specific to Britain, though Britain may have taken it to a level of no empire before it. That is all empires of all time. You organise your national resources in such a way, and your national strength, to go around the world stealing other people's resources, and you do
which is still happening.
Which is happening every day, right? Now, when you do things like this, you're not going to say to your population, we're not very nice, and we do things that are not very nice. You're going to say we're moral, we're wonderful, we're brilliant, and we have the right to go and do to these people whatever we want. And so that cognitive dissonance, the space between what you believe to be true about yourself and your actual actions, create a problematic for people. And so rather than say, well, actually, we've got some pretty ugly episodes in our history, people say, no, it's their fault. It's the Raggeds or you know, the Coons or whoever else, right? Even though this country's never been invaded, in my recollection of history, this country has not been invaded by any country from the Middle East, certainly not in my lifetime, maybe not even ever in the history of this country. If we count the Phoenicians of 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, then perhaps. But the idea that it's those people's fault, what happens to them, it's those people's fault, is a way of masking historical guilt, and slavery was the most...
It's also a tactic. It's a tactic.
Oh, of course.
So scapegoating
of course.
and you know, point what you said, pointing the finger. It's a transference of evil.
Of course, because as I said, the people in power, I mean, people in this country, in one of the richest countries in the world, and I'm talking about supposedly indigenous white people, freeze to death every year because they can't afford to keep their heat.
Queuing up in food banks.
This really happens. Yet people are convinced that somehow a person from Bangladesh is the problem. It's amazing to me, and that's a way of not dealing with, and the people in power, just again what we come back to, say fighting amongst yourself. It's convincing you all that you lot are each other's problems, and we are benevolent people in power. We're so wonderful and kind, and you know you shouldn't look at us because of course we're nothing to do with the problem.
So music, the most powerful medium in the world, why isn't it politicised?
Well, I think music is politicised. I think commercial music is no longer politicised because I think the music industry learned, in my belief, with people like Jimi Hendrix, with people like Tupac Shakur, with people like John Lennon, Bob Dylan to a degree, certainly Bob Marley, certainly Fela Kuti, the music industry learned the tremendous resources that we now know the FBI, the CIA, other agencies spent just monitoring these people for a start. Clearly shows you they knew how influential music could be. And I believe the music industry's learnt a lesson. It's like, do we really want the most famous man in the world, like Bob Marley, going to sing for Zimbabwean independence? And being able to highlight to all colours of people why Zimbabwe had the right to fight apartheid in an armed way? Do we really want to create a situation where we put people who've actually got the balls to do what Muhammad Ali did or someone like that? Do we want to put people in that kind of pedestal again? Do we want to spend billions of dollars making people that actually might undermine our bigger interests, right? Do we want to spend billions of dollars doing that? And I believe the music industry.
See, that shows you how the power that it has, just for your Bob Marley example.
Yeah, if you're Bob Marley, if you're Jimi Hendrix, if you're John Lennon, if you're any of these people who gets to a position of massive wealth,
but
massive
someone's
power,
owning the music to stop that from happening, no?
Of course, but what the brilliance is, a lot of these artists are worth more to the record labels dead than alive anyway. So it's no skin off. If I own your masters, you've created loads of music that is a product. You dying is no big deal to me. We know what's going to happen when you die. Everyone's going to go out and buy your albums, especially if I think you're over the hill and you're past your best work. Someone bumps you off. I mean, people act like it's like with Bob Marley. People just swallow the idea of the way he died, and if you say anything different, they call you a conspiracy theorist. They act as if there wasn't an assassination attempt on this guy's life. Like someone shot him and attempted to shoot him in the heart and shot his wife in the head. Not long before he suddenly developed miraculous toe cancer. His mum said many times she doesn't buy the official story. Everyone wants to call you a conspiracy theorist if you even entertain the idea that musicians might just get bumped off every now and then.
What do you mean by the road?
The road, by the road, I mean the street. I mean the alternative economy. I mean the space in which a lot of young working class people, predominantly boys of colour in this city. But if you go to Glasgow, it's predominantly white boys. If you go anywhere else, whoever's in that socioeconomic circumstance, the alternative economy that those people end up in, the fights over drugs, over a certain way of doing things, over the small space in which people can get some degree of economic self-sufficiency that is controlled by the powerful also. That's the roads. A certain way of doing things, a certain code of ethics. Not that code of ethics necessarily is obeyed.
Can be skullduggery.
Yeah, it is. The roads
So because at the moment we've got 1 million youth unemployed.
Yeah.
We've got a workfare program that's giving people the option, right, you go and put a paper hat on and you work in Asda's for no pay, just for your social security, or you stop, you say, I'm not going on the dole, I'm leaving, I'm going to find my own resources, I'm going to finance myself.
Yeah, well, people are surplus now, we're done with you, You're surplus labour now, we're a post-industrial society. We don't need millions of people in factories anymore to be serfs and slaves. So we're done with you. Social security wasn't about benevolence. Welfare wasn't about benevolence. It was a necessary. Power only concedes what is demanded, right? And so, for the time in which it's necessary for purposes of propaganda, for purposes of political convenience, to keep poor people in a particular stratosphere, a certain level of comfort, that'll be done. The moment that becomes inconvenient or a threat, people are going to attempt to cut it. Powerful people don't do things because they're nice. There might be individuals, but the system is, you don't become a billionaire by being kind to people.
I'm the artist taxi driver. This, my friends, is Akala. Knowledge is power.